Hello everybody, welcome to Microsoft Customer Success Day. Today we're going to be talking about developing superpowers with Power Apps. I'm Jay Gokhale, a Cloud Solutions Architect at Microsoft.
And I'm Kyle Christensen. I'm a Senior Business Program Manager in our Customer Success Unit in Microsoft. Before we progress into the presentation too much, I did want to acknowledge DynamicsCon and also just highlight that we will have a chat going throughout this presentation, and we'll jump on live after for a Q&A for anybody that wants to ask some live questions. With that, let's talk a little bit about superpowers with Power Apps. I think it's important to note that when you are having superpowers with Power Apps, the question that the questions that you see on the screen here are the questions that every organization needs to ask. What are the solutions that we're going to build on Power App? We're going to build on Power Apps. Who's going to build those solutions? Where are the solutions going to be built? And how are solutions going to be secure and up to date? Now, you recognize I said solutions here and not apps. I want you to think of that as kind of synonymous as we go through the presentation today. Before we jump into the crux of the conversation, though, I did want to talk a little bit about the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 Adoption Framework. You see this framework on the screen and recognize there's a whole lot of information here. Really, for a customer to develop true superpowers with Power Apps, they really need to go through all of the different aspects, both on the project side and on the project framework side. When we say the project framework, we're really talking about an application or a solution specific. When we talk about a platform framework, we're talking about the all-up tenant architecture that exists for a customer organization. We're not going to get into everything that's on here today, but what we will focus in on is a lot of these critical tasks. We're going to paint our conversation today in context of kind of this app portfolio management piece. And so as we go through and try to answer those questions that we just talked about, think of it in terms of how do you manage an app portfolio? So let's first talk about what is going to be built. Most organizations, when they're talking about what's going to be built, they think of it in terms of kind of a funnel of ideas that come in. And you have to ask yourself the question, where do ideas come from within an organization? Generally, there's two places where ideas come from inside of an organization. First is new ideas. These usually come up in things like hackathons or different envisioning events. Maybe you've got people from throughout your organization that get together in a room and throw darts or put sticky notes up on a wall. The other way that we get ideas in an organization is we look at our existing app portfolio and we take a look and we say, are there things that we need to modernize? Maybe it's an on-prem application that we want to get into the cloud. Maybe it's an Access or an Excel spreadsheet that somebody's using in a funny way. You want to modernize those. And so the idea is each organization will start at the top of the funnel. They'll get all of these ideas in, and then they'll have some sort of prioritization method that brings it down to the key few things that they want to build on the platform. Jay's going to talk a little bit about each of these different things with the different solutions that there are in Power Platform that can help you manage this idea of app portfolio management.
Thanks, Kyle. So one of the tools is the innovation backlog, and this is part of the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. So with this tool, members of an organization can go and submit ideas onto this backlog of what business problems should be addressed with Power Platform. You can upvote great ideas, assign different top ideas to an engineering team. There's lots of granular details that you can accomplish with the innovation backlog. One stipulation with the innovation backlog is that every user requires a premium license for the application. That works well for some smaller organizations, but maybe not so well for larger organizations where not everybody has a premium license. So another tool we have to help generate ideas and really be able to crowdsource good business problems to solve with Power Platform is through this Great Ideas app with teams. It works very similarly to the innovation backlog, where there's cards that can be created and you can upvote ideas, and people can also comment on them. Similarly, you can also pin this Ideas app in a channel or a Teams team, and you can be able to spread the app throughout your organization and crowdsource ideas.
And Jay, you can tie these two together, right? So let's say you have an organization where you want to crowdsource the ideas in the Great Ideas app, but maybe the funneling exercise and the identifying which ones you're going to move forward with, that would happen more in the innovation backlog. Is that correct?
Definitely. You could definitely have a process like that. So here's just a bit of information about how to get started with the Great Ideas Teams app today.
And again, the innovation backlog you can download from the COE Starter Kit. So after an organization has funneled down these ideas, they've gotten it down to a key few set of ideas, the next thing that you're trying to answer is, what is the solution-specific architecture? You've identified just one app or one solution that you want to build. We're going to talk about some patterns that generally come up when you're really having success with Power Platform. This view that you're seeing in front of you, we're going to refer back to as we go throughout the presentation today. And you'll note that there's kind of a sequence of events that you're going to take every application or every solution that you're building through. The first piece is developing your application-specific architecture. We're going to talk about some different architectures that are common within the Power Platform, recognizing that whenever you decide you're going to go and build something, you have to identify what is that architecture going to look like. Is it going to be Power by itself, or are you going to have additional components to it that might extend beyond the Power Platform? You'll note that with architectures in Power Platform, there are multiple different patterns that we see. We're not going to go into all of these today, but I do want to highlight a few of them. Most people, when they think about the Power Platform, they think of the simple citizen developer scenario, which generally is kind of a very simple forms over data type business need. I want you to start to think about Power Platform as much more than just this simple scenario. As I go through the next few slides, we're going to go through a number of architectures that you could think about when you're building a solution on Power Platform. Let's look at an additional citizen developer scenario, but this time it's not just sitting all within the Power Platform. Maybe this is a scenario where the citizen developer works with a more pro developer and creates a custom connector that invokes a Python function that exists in Azure. This is still a relatively simple build, but you notice that it's extending beyond just the Power Platform itself. There's other situations where you might have a Power App that sits on a custom connector that utilizes API management to go out and to go out to additional SaaS APIs. Another example is an OAuth protected API that might exist in an on-prem situation. Again, you've got a Power App sitting on top of a custom connector that might use some security now that's advanced so that you can connect into an external system. Another architecture that you might find is on-prem data plus Power, similar to the last one, but you might use additional functionality inside of the Azure space. Now let's talk about a scenario that exists just in the cloud. Again, you have Power Platform components, maybe Dataverse you're using, as well as an app for inventory scanning. You might use some API management. There may be a message broker, some compute power, and all of this sits on top of a data situation like SQL or a data warehouse. Now let's look at a seventh scenario, an SAP extension. SAP has an express route with Power Platform where you can easily connect SAP into an application as it sits on top. There's an additional, now let's think about a scenario where you're not actually using an app. This is really an automation scenario where maybe you have a Teams situation where you need to notify a user when a certain thing happens. So there's a custom app that's happening over here that's connecting into Azure that then connects to a Power Automate flow that then notifies the user. You might have heard of intelligent QA and bots. These will also be able to be done in Power Platform, and it's an additional architecture that you might want to think about. An even more complex scenario is an electronic document storage. You have Power Platform on the front end and the back end, but in the middle you have an Azure situation. The last example that we'll show is an IT democratization situation. Maybe you have an on-prem SQL database that you want to have a business developer interface with using. So again, we have a custom connector here, and there's multiple Azure functions that are being invoked to help process the data as it goes back and forth between the data source and the user interface. I lied, there's one more. We got the IoT event situation. Here's a situation where you may have devices that are sitting out on a, let's say this is an oil and gas scenario or an energy scenario. Maybe you have wind farms or oil and gas rigs out in a certain place that have devices that are tapping into an IoT hub that then dump that information into a data lake. You also want users to have access to that data either through an app or through a Teams scenario. Note that all of these different scenarios that we've talked about, you've had Power Platform components, but you have to think about the architecture of other things that might be incorporated as you go forward. Another scenario is a communication services and power situation, where again, you have a custom app that might be sitting on a certain Azure functionality, and then you enhance that with a Power Platform situation. All of these scenarios are situations that you as a customer want to think through before you just go and start building an app. You want to think about what is the architecture? What are the data sources that I'm going to have to think about tapping into? What's going to happen to the data in transit? Do you need to transform the data? Some of that is really powerful in Power Platform on its own, but when you start tapping into the additional functionalities that come in the Azure space, it becomes even more powerful. So Jay, let's transition a little bit and talk who's going to build it. Let's say you've identified your app, you've funneled it through the funnel, you've identified the architecture, you've talked about what's going on. What comes next, Jay? What are you trying to figure out?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. So when determining or thinking about who you want to bring into your team to build out these solutions, one of the key concepts that we want to focus on is a fusion team. So the fusion team consists of three key personas. The first is the citizen developer. These are frontline workers or maybe business administrators who don't have a vast technical background. The second group are professional developers. These are people who live and breathe code. They have Visual Studio or VS Code open all day long. The third persona is IT professionals. These are people like cybersecurity specialists or perhaps operations folk. And fusion teams are this combination of these three different personas that when they can effectively collaborate together and fill in the gaps in each other's missing strength, really accelerate your app and solution development. So I want to highlight the importance of these fusion teams and the real business need for them. So there's been several studies that show that the amount of apps and solutions that businesses or organizations are going to need to generate are going to it's going to far outpace the amount of actual pro developers there are to build out these applications or solutions. So fusion teams work together by having the pro devs, the citizen devs, and the IT professionals all working together to be able to minimize that gap. So let's look at an example process of how this might work. So the professional developer starts by building out some of the more complicated parts of the solution. So they might build a custom API and place it in Azure API management. They might interact with some legacy data. They might build a custom Azure function. And they might make some high-level architectural decisions about how the solution should be built, like Kyle described with those architectural patterns before. So once a lot of those higher-level decisions are made, the professional developer can bring in a low-code developer to help accelerate the app or solution development process. So the citizen developer can build out the UI. They can work with out-of-the-box connectors. More on that later. And they can really work with the pro developer to help build out that last-mile functionality, taking some of the workload off the professional developer's plate and outsourcing it to a wide talent pool of low-code developers within your organization. So I want to emphasize that Power Platform isn't meant to replace any of the pro devs' existing tool sets. It's an additional tool that they can add to their arsenal. And one of the ways that pro devs can really accelerate the value and impact that they can have in your organization is by building out APIs that citizen developers can consume and build apps with Power Apps to really decrease that technical debt gap that you have in your organization. So one thing we really want to call out here is the idea of how Power Platform connects with other services like Azure or third-party services to really accelerate your application development. So low-code users or citizen developers can use out-of-the-box connectors from within Power Platform. So this is a group of more than 400 pre-built connectors that can interface with services like Dropbox, with Salesforce, with what's another example? Oracle systems. Exactly. And low-code developers can really easily build on top of these to extend their Power Apps, Power solutions. Pro-code developers can not only use those connectors, but they can use custom connectors. These are all built off the Open API definition. And these allow you to really connect your Power Platform solutions with any third-party service and helps extend your Power Platform as a key tool for rapid development when you're building solutions.
Thanks, Jay. Now let's talk a little bit about after you've determined what you're going to build, then you've discussed who's going to build it. The next question is, where is it going to be built? Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's discuss environment strategy. Referring back to this graphic that we showed before, you've got a development team now. Maybe it's a Fusion team. They've identified an application-specific architecture. Now let's talk about the environment structure for that app. Let's think about it in the context of the broader tenant-level architecture, and also think about the idea of a DLP policy. DLP in this case stands for data loss prevention policy. So we're getting into security a little bit now. Think of an environment as a container. Every tenant that exists in the world has a default environment. Lots of people have access to the default environment, but also recognize that that environment is the container in which you build. Now, your connectors are going to sit in here. Your connections are going to sit in here. Your data will be connected through here, if not existing within here. Your apps are going to be built in here. inside of the environment, inside of a tenant, you're going to have multiple environments. As we noted before, you'll have a default environment. You might have some developer environments where only one user has access. You may have some critical project environments that have limited access to only the users who need to have access to that information. You might also have business unit specific environments that are set up with dev, test, prod, where you can also add some project development environments that might share some of that test and prod environments. Each organization, when they set up their tenant, they need to have a strategy for how they're going to set up the tenant level architecture. Then when a project comes along, they have to make a decision. For this specific solution, for this specific application that we're building, where is that solution going to reside? Are we going to put it into an existing environment, or is this a critical type application that needs its own set of environments? Those are critical decisions that the team needs to make. Jay, do you want to take a second and talk about the tiers of applications and how that plays into the environment structure?
Yeah, of course. So at a very basic level, we recommend that you break your applications into 3 different tiers. So the highest level is your critical applications. These are ones that your business heavily relies on and will cause big issues if they break. These are apps or solutions that should be might need custom environments, might need robust management or auditing processes. And so these can go in either pre-configured environments for critical applications or solutions, or they can have dedicated environments, even a dedicated dev, test, or prod environment. The next level are important applications. These are ones that are important to your business, but maybe not as important as your critical applications. Finally, you have your general productivity applications. These are ones that don't require robust management or application lifecycle management tooling. And these are ones where you might not need to build out a custom environment for, and they can go in your default environment or some kind of personal productivity environment. So advice we have on how to choose what apps or solutions go into different environments. We really want to take 2 things into account. The first is the business criticality of the solution, and the second is the lifetime of the resource. Is this going to be a solution that you just use for a month, or is this going to become a key part? Is this app or solution going to become a key tool that your organization uses for years and years to come? So once you've chosen your sample environment classification that ties in with the tiers of applications, the third step is to map DLP policies, data loss prevention policies, to the specific environments. So the default or personal productivity environments that are for the general purpose productivity apps, they often or they should be associated with a very restrictive DLP policy. This helps enforce a high level of security. As you have more and more dedicated environments, you can have riskier or less secure DLP policies to provide those extra functionalities and that extra granular control for these business critical applications.
And one thing that I would note here, Jay, it does seem a little bit counterintuitive that your core would be the highly restricted DLP policy and your dedicated would be the least restrictive. Remember, this is just talking about access to connectors across. There's another layer of security, which is user access. And that might be the opposite, where it's not as restricted on the dedicated, or on the core, it might not be as restricted, and it would be much more restricted on user access in the dedicated space.
Thanks for bringing that up, Kyle. That's a common confusion we see with Power Platform. One of the reasons why it's designed like this is because one of the key rules of Power Platform is that everybody has access to apps and solutions in the default environment. So as a result, there's some very heavy security policies that are applied to that. This slide shows a decision tree that you can use to help decide whether you should put your solutions as a critical, important, or productivity kinds of environments.
All right. Excuse me. So now we've talked about, you've got an organization, you've generated some ideas, you've funneled those into a funnel, you've identified an architecture, you have identified a couple apps that you want to build, you've identified that architecture for it, you've identified who's going to build it, you've also identified what's going to be built. Now let's talk about how is the solution going to be kept secure and up to date. Let's talk a little bit about that app security that we were referring to a little bit in the previous section. Power Platform has multiple security layers. You've got a tenant access and isolation. That's one security layer. You've got environment access and strategy. We've talked about both of those a little bit. You've also got resource permissions. That's going to be specific to the different resources. You got connector access and data loss policies. And the very last is the Dataverse security. The security roles are basically roles that are assigned to users who are associated. This is really sitting at the data level. So when we talk about security roles in Power Platform, we're talking about securing the underlying data that's associated with an application. Some of the key out-of-the-box security roles that you might need to be familiar with are environment admin, system customizer, environment maker, and then basic user. It is a recommended practice to utilize these wherever possible, but you can also create custom security roles as well. An example of what's happening within a security role is you have multiple tables of data. Sorry, I clicked forward. You have multiple tables of data that have different privileges associated with that table. So what you're doing when you're assigning a security role is you're giving that user access to those tables in one of the many different ways, whether it be create, read, write, delete, append to, etc. The other thing that you have to grant access to that's a different level. So we talked about security roles, which are at the data level. You also have to share the components of a solution. So in this example that you see in front of you, they've got data permissions, but you're also granting them access maybe to an application or to a automated flow that's happening in the back end of the application. There's multiple different components that can be built within the Power Platform, and you have to establish security for each of them. Some of this can be simplified by putting all of the components of an app into a solution. And we're not going to talk too much about solutions, but solutions are a recommended practice with Power Platform. Jay, you want to talk a little bit about data policies?
Yeah. So data policies can be enforced by, at the tenant level or the environment level, and these control what kind of connectors developers can use to build out solutions. So an example would be you want to, in an environment, build out a app that connects with Salesforce, or your Power App connects with Salesforce or Oracle databases, but you want to block any connections to social media like Facebook or Instagram. So with data policies, you can really sort out what connectors are allowed in your environment or in your solution and have very granular security control.
So just to review, there's really 5 layers of security. I'm not going to go through these again, but we talked about tenant access being the key, just granting people access there. The rest of these tie into all of the things that we just discussed. Now let's talk just for a minute about managed environments. Jay, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So managed environments are a relatively new addition to the Power Platform, and these really help environment admins and tenant admins manage environments by giving them more visibility and more control with less effort. So managed environments have a wide feature set, not all of which are available today, but they allow admins to generate usage analytics, to have licensing reports, to limit the amount of apps and solutions and how they can be shared. So this is really key functionality in helping environment admins and tenant admins manage their environment. One key feature of managed environments is that every user will require a premium license. So that is just one thing to keep in mind. So I want to just address that managed environments are one part of the governance picture, governance and administration picture for Power Platform. But there's also other tools like the Power Platform Admin Center and the Center of Excellence Kit that are all going to be key areas or tools that an environment or tenant admin can go to help administer and secure their Power Platform tenant.
So as we talk about managed environments, one of the things that I want to highlight is application lifecycle management. This is how you keep it. This is really how you keep a application up to date. Now, when you think about an application, I want to talk specifically about some of these enterprise scale applications that might be bigger than just a citizen developer. You might need to build them with a Fusion team. When you think about those solutions, think of them in context of this model that we have here on the screen, where you have a dev, maybe a validation, you might have a test, you might have a UAT, you might have a production. You've got data that's happening in all of these different places. Now, obviously, you don't want your development to be happening in the same place that your production data is taking place. And so that's why you segment your application into multiple different environments. What asset lifecycle management is, or sometimes it's referred to as application lifecycle management, is the movement of the solutions between the various different environments that are associated with your application. We're going to talk about some of the different options that there are with Power Platform related to ALM. And note that some of these options are relatively new and are developing functionality almost every day. Generally, at a high level, what's happening is your low-code developer might be making the majority of the changes, and they're probably doing that in a dev environment. Really, it's not just the low-code developer, though. It's every developer. You're going to make those changes in the dev, then you're going to use a pipeline to export that solution and unpack it into the next environment. Those changes will be committed to a new branch, and then the more professional dev will open a PR, which stands for pull request, to merge the changes into the next environment. That in some situations, this will also release a source control, and we'll talk about which ALM solutions have source control and which ones don't. And then the pipeline will validate that solution. It'll pack that solution up, and then that will be published into a production environment or a test environment, depending on how you're setting up the pipeline. So what goes into a solution? All of the different things that you see here on the screen are various aspects of components that might make up a solution. Notice that there are security functions that might be part of the solution. You might have processes, dialogues, and plugins that are coming in. Obviously, you're going to have the user interface. Maybe there's analytics that are associated. all of that, along with the schema, the tables, the columns, the relationship, if you package that up in a solution, that's what's being processed through the pipeline from one environment to the next environment to the next environment. There's two types of solutions. There's unmanaged solutions, which is basically a collection of references or components. There's really no restrictions on here. I like to refer to unmanaged solutions as dev environment solutions. And then there's managed solutions, which are, these are really a sealed component that once it gets moved to the next environment, changes can't really be made after that. So I refer to these as the test or production solutions. Now, that's kind of a broad description. Sometimes there's other functions that kind of go with unmanaged and managed. But at a high level, unmanaged are for dev environments, managed are for test and production environments. So ALM with Power Platform, the first of the options that you have for Power Platform is the in-product Power Platform pipelines. These were announced only about a month ago, but they're already becoming a very powerful tool within the Power Platform toolset. Note that in-product Power Platform pipelines is a function of managed environments, and to be able to utilize all the functionality, you do have to utilize the managed environment component. So essentially what's happening here, as you can see, I'm going to work from the bottom of the slide up. Basically what's happening is you do the development. A user that's done the development will then click and push a button inside a Power Platform that moves that solution from the dev environment into a test environment. That environment, then they look at, make sure that it works, they push another button, and it goes to the Power Platform production environment. Note that there's very few steps here. It's all very well organized within the platform itself, and it makes this ALM process very simple. However, there's a few things that aren't yet there in the out-of-the-box Power Platform pipelines. One thing is source control. Source control is the idea that as you process a solution from one environment into the next environment, you would actually log all of the code and all of the components of that into a file that's located on some database within your ecosystem. I've been told that that is a functionality that's coming in the future, but as of right now, it doesn't exist within Power Platform pipelines. There's other functionality that's on the roadmap that's also going to be built in, that's going to bring this solution to parity with some of the other solutions we're going to discuss. But as of right now, this is the recommended practice for ALM within Power Platform, unless you have a reason to need some of the other pieces. Another function that's really cool about Power Platform pipelines is that there will be a test that's done internal to the Power Platform to check for problems with your solution as it's being deployed. Again, this is just a reiteration of what's happening. You've got artifacts that exist within your environment. You're going to process that. It's going to go to the test stage, QA. Then it'll have some pre-stage components. This is what we're talking about that's coming soon. Then it'll go to production stage prod. And also there's some post-stage conditions that are going to be coming soon. The second option for ALM with Power Platform is the ALM Accelerator. The ALM Accelerator is a component of the COE starter kit. It's a what we call a first-party add-on that can be deployed by a customer organization, where Microsoft has basically done the programming of the ALM for you. You just have to configure it, and it will work through. In this diagram, you see what's kind of happening. So basically, the user is going to make manual interaction, which is making changes in the development environment. Then they're going to click Save Solution or Commit Solution, and that's going to happen inside of a Power App that's custom built by Microsoft that you deploy into your tenant. After you've commit the solution, it's going to export that unmanaged solution and commit it to a Git work branch in GitHub. It's using ADO to do that. You'll then click in the app to promote the solution and deploy the solution, which is going to create an additional pull request to merge the work branch in the solution and deploy it into the validation employment for quality control. The last step that you'll do is you'll complete the pull request, which merges the work branch into a solution branch and deploys the build of solution into the test environment. After which, as you've tested, as you've verified, you can then create and complete another pull request, which will merge that solution branch into the main branch and deploy the build into the production. So you'll note it's a little bit more nuanced, and it takes a few more steps. It probably would require some more advanced knowledge that you'd probably need kind of a pro developer for. But it still does that process of moving the solution very easily. And what's great about this one is it does give you the opportunity to save the source control as of today. Jay, do you want to talk about the GitHub workflows and the key concepts?
Yeah, exactly. And this GitHub concept could even be extended to ADO as well. So Microsoft uses GitHub Actions or ADO pipelines to be able to, you can use these tools if you want very granular control over how solutions get moved throughout your environment. So you can create pipelines with YAML code to be able to make very custom pipelines or workflows. You can also use GitHub or ADO secret management features and other code scanning security features to really build customized pipelines for your solutions.
So again, just to think about ALM design, things to consider at a glance. What you're really doing with ALM is you're creating a true asset lifecycle management process. There's multiple different options for it. Power Platform functions very well with all of them. So the last question that we want to answer is, once that solution is built, once you've built the ALM, once you've deployed to production, what's the ongoing support structure going to look like to maintain it? Jay, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, I think this is something that organizations often or it's hard to take out the time to develop an ongoing support structure. The solution is finished, it's deployed, everybody's happy, and we're moving on. So one key thing is just schedule time for having making a support plan for your application. And then the second key feature is documentation of how this solution works, of how the app works, of how the pipelines are built and what they connect, and making sure that information, it generally goes in a source control solution, is tied to the application with a specific plan for how to maintain it.
And I would add, you have to harken back to the very beginning of our presentation when we talked about application architecture, establishing a criticality of an app, et cetera, and think about that in context of your organization. So every organization has a profile of what their IT support looks like, what their partner support looks like. And when I say partners, I'm thinking in terms of like consultants that come in to help you build these things. You have to think about what that ongoing support structure is going to look like in context of all of that, right? So depending on your app architecture, if it's a very simple personal productivity app, you probably don't need too much ongoing support for it. The person who built it is probably going to be that ongoing support. But when you get into the more enterprise scale, maybe ones that are built by others that have come into your organization, you really need to think about, how do we maintain this? Who's going to manage everything as it goes forward? Are you going to do that in-house, or are you going to set a contract up with this partner who built it to come back regularly and just check in on the health of the application? These are all considerations that you really need to think about if you're going to be a Superman with Power Apps.
Thanks for mentioning that, Kyle. Another key topic to bring up is auditing. Several of our customers use Power Platform solutions for very key business processes that sometimes might get audited, and analyzing how you might approach an audit and what kind of tools Power Platform has to help you with that can be part of this process too. We won't go too much into those tools today, though. I know we're getting close to time.
So that's how you can develop superpowers with Power Platform. We really want to thank everyone. And again, thank DynamicsCon for having us here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.